Welcome to this episode of Abide in Me, How Jesus Models Secure Attachment with God. This series is a survey of the Gospel of Mark, looking for how Jesus models what is now called secure attachment, which is the physiological, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual experience of what is often called salvation or regeneration or being conjoined with God or enlightenment, individuation, even becoming spiritual. Through the series, we will discover the benefits of becoming securely attached with God, which is the transformation of one's life into one of joy and satisfaction. So we come to the end of Mark chapter 6 and the beginning of Mark chapter 7. These two stories we're going to put together because they illustrate the light and the shadow of a core human condition, a very basic human need, and that is the need to be accepted because we are doing what is right. We are following the rules, and following those rules is keeping us in the tribe, safe and secure, and so in a relationship with all the other people in our tribe. So it begins with the apostles and Jesus successfully crossing the lake after the storm, and they land on the shore there in Capernaum, and immediately they're swamped with people who want to be healed. And they know that all they have to do is touch the fringe of his robe or have him touch them, and they will be healed. So they have this need, this basic human need, and it is being met by Jesus simply by touching the hem of his robe. A miracle, and it's connected to their belief that if they could get there, they would be healed. The very next story, there in Capernaum, some Pharisees and teachers of religious law, they're called the scribes, right? They are the religious leaders, and they protect the sanctity and the purity of the doctrine. And in this story, they immediately call out Jesus and his disciples for eating with unwashed hands, which was a very important Mosaic law. It makes sense. We wash our hands before we eat, right? But in this case, the Pharisees, and they were saying, if you don't follow this age-old tradition, then you're not in the tribe. You'll be cast out. You could even be put to death. And of course, then Jesus calls them out for being hypocrites. So that they were simply saying, it's this ancient law given by Moses, so that gives it real importance, a real scriptural foundation. And the fact that people aren't following it is to these protectors of the law, of the doctrine, of the church, a violation of the law that meant people were not in the tribe. They were no longer part of the chosen people. And Jesus calls them out by saying that the problem you're having here is that you are not following God's law, you are following your own tradition. Because in the shadow side of this is that, of course, we want to obey God's laws. Of course, we want to live up to our religion's scriptures. And we ought to be doing that. What Jesus is pointing out is that a securely attached person will not impose that law on someone else for the purpose of condemning them or excluding them. That changes it from being a worshipful manifestation of one's relationship to one's God, turns it into a hypocritical application that simply serves the shadow side of one's ego and does not actually contribute to any secure attachment. So if we go back to how it happened that people came to Jesus and that they thought that if they touched him, they would be healed. And we now know that touch is healing. What happened to you the last time you had a very serious hug with a loved one? We've measured that. Science has looked at that and said it makes a change in your brain. There's a physiological response to that touch. And we've gone very deep into understanding this. There's something complex and amazing going on here. Pressure on a nerve, right, just under your skin, actually manufactures an electrical signal that makes it to the brain. And it first arrives at that primitive part of our brain, the processor, the top of the spine, the bottom of the brain, and there's an immediate and completely automatic reaction to protect or to reproduce. The brain and the body have this automatic, God-given reaction to that touch, either to engage with the person who's touching us, to receive love from them, to give love to them, or to protect ourselves, to push them away, to stop them, right? Depending on this touch and its message to us. Because the message goes from that automatic reaction then to the center of our brain, to the more sophisticated processors, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and so forth. And there is a different response. It is the response that we've trained ourselves to make, that has been learned over billions of years. If we have become quite adept at being able to tell very quickly the difference between a safe touch and a dangerous touch. We know then that this same electrical message then goes to the outer layers of the brain, to the two sides of the brain, which have different reactions, to the billions of synapses which process the signal by bringing it into relationship with other signals and other learned behaviors and all the connections. There's an interaction, a grouping, there's a back and forth. This is the human processing power that our physiology has. And it all happens in milliseconds, right? It can extend for quite a long time, right? We can be shaky for a long time after a traumatic event or a dangerous event because our body is still processing the threat. And then it becomes really complex because there is yet another energy being used. You have experienced this other energy. We all have. Remember the thoughts and emotions you had when you have experienced joy, or when you've experienced fear, or when you have experienced a negative reaction, or gotten angry, or sadness. These are more sophisticated processes of the mind that, while relying on senses coming in, like this touch, nonetheless are an operation of the spirit. So that the physical touch that we felt then becomes a metaphor or a representative of the love that corresponds to the physiological experience. It may be this love of the other person that's being communicated, or it could be our love of protecting ourselves, which would mean we would then push back. The story tells us what we know to be the physiology. People recognized Jesus. They had a belief about Jesus. They responded to touching him or being touched. So by the time Jesus comes along, he is now awakening a deeper sense of consciousness, and that runs up against this older view represented by the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, whose job it was to hold true to the doctrine, to the dogma, to the teachings, so that we would be right with God, so that everybody would be in the tribe. But they had become afraid of breaking the law. They feared the loss of community. And when they saw other people not obeying the traditions, not obeying the law, that fear drove them to compel compliance. Again, over just a couple of generations, I can imagine, because we've seen it happen here amongst us, that eventually becomes a need to be in power and to hold power over other people so that they obey, right? And then that becomes hypocrisy. We hypocritically seek to make others lesser than ourselves, and stuck in those powerless, childlike states of life. This circumstance has become the norm among humans, as Jesus points out, and has existed since time immemorial, and I presume will continue to the end of humankind. Now, my presumption here is that Jesus knew all this, even if he did not have the modern language of psychology. And so he told stories and he did miracles. He called up their own scriptures to stop them in their tracks and to reveal, as it were, to remind them of the intent of the Mosaic law. He gave people a secure connection to him by loving them, by caring for them, by not being defensive, but also not being judgmental. And because their minds were being opened, their spirits were being opened by this love, they responded to this invitation and so came into a relationship with him and believed he could heal them. And it worked. So those who believed him began to act from the divine love. And Jesus was actually, miraculously, Christians believe, incarnating on earth that power in himself. So when people asked for the truth or for healing, they got it because they opened themselves to the healing powers of divine love. Now, there were plenty of people whose fear stopped them from wanting to feel that connection. It was scary to them. They were holding on to their beliefs, their traditions that they thought were good and true. And so they were stuck. They could not grow. They could not let go of this egotistical, materialistic view of even the Mosaic law. And this happens today. I may actually know the truth, but it comes through my ego, for instance, by insisting that you agree with me and that you do what I believe is good. When I do that, as accurate as my doctrine may be, my ideas may be, I am not participating in the flow of divine love. I am not inviting you into a relationship that manifests the flow of divine love. I am being a bad actor, a hypocrite. Hypocrite in the Greek meant actor. So hypocrite is a bad actor. So people at that time knew that they had to wash their hands in this divinely ordained way in order to be righteous, in order to be part of the tribe. This is what Moses taught them. Holiness for them was entirely the external ritual acts that they would do, which was intended to create a place and a space for them to cultivate a purity of mind and heart, so be a good and kind person. But when people institutionalized the acts and made them acts of power, then that removed the spirit and purpose for the acts. So our life's work is first to discover the rules of life, right? We learn that from our parents and teachers and from our scriptures, especially that which is revealed by God, that describe the flow of love, right? And then next, our work is to take them on as our own. So we come to the Lord seeking healing, but we also recognize that what we do needs to be an authentic manifestation of our trust and belief in God's laws, not simply an external obedience of them like that would save us. We have to come to believe, despite merely external considerations, that these inner beliefs, these desires they describe, will save us and support our individuation, our internal locus of control, our experience of being securely attached. It is the internal experience, not the external, that performs that healing work. And that's asking a lot. And that is what Jesus was asking of the people when he challenged their traditions. Here's an example. Imagine that we decide we want to change to the metric system in this country, in the U.S. It would be hard. But no one argues that it is evil. And that's why we should or shouldn't do it. But can we stop labeling people evil who are different from me, from the majority of us? That's difficult. To many, it feels dangerous to not label people who are different evil. The Word, the Christian scriptures, everyone's scriptures tell us what to do. Concentrate on the laws of God as applied to oneself. Keep going back to those basic truths, the simple rules of behavior that represent love for our neighbor and a relationship with God. Pay attention to when our ego comes in and we begin protecting ourselves and our worldview rather than promoting the Lord, goodness, love, the divine, the universe, as a good place, as a loving place. I picture Jesus standing in the village square and people clamoring around him, and he stays present. And he connects with every single person that comes to him to touch him or that he reaches out to touch. It had to have been such a powerful experience, this feeling of acceptance, even though they were diseased. He wasn't saying, as many of the protectors of the doctrine taught then, that if they were sick, that they were evil. We are told in other places that even lepers could come to Jesus, even though that was such a contagious disease. We now know it wasn't, but that's what they thought. And Jesus did not judge them. So can I model that? Can I be a person standing amongst those who are hurting, those who are grieving, those who have been wounded, those who are finding all sorts of unhelpful ways of expressing their woundedness, all sorts of really, in fact, negative ways of seeking connection? Can I stand with those people and love them? Whenever I've done that, whenever I've experienced that, and it's pretty easy to do in a therapy session when the person is coming and saying, look, I'm hurting, and I'm able to sit there loving them, that I will then create an opportunity for that person to feel healed, that is, securely attached, maybe for the first time in their life, being loved and loving, having a healthy sense of self and an ability to see one's own worth and to live out of that. That's what Jesus was giving those people when they came to him. And then there were the Pharisees that showed up. And they didn't show up with love in their eyes and conciliation and offering help and support for people who were trying the best they could to live their lives. No, they called out people for not washing their hands properly. Of course we want to wash our hands before we eat. I have to believe that the people knew that. But for this official to come and say, you're not doing it right, and therefore you're not righteous with God, therefore you're not in the tribe anymore, which is a death sentence, right? If you have to be left out all on your own. That would have been off-putting, to say the least. And it's not the way divine love flows. Of course we want our children to obey the rules. It keeps them safe. It creates a safe world in which we all can live and share. And we want the children to learn that, in fact, it is the divine love flowing into them according to the rules that the divine has set up that actually heals them, that saves them, that actually produces the desire to cooperate with others and wash your hands before preparing other people's food, for instance. So it's like I say, it's a light and a shadow of this basic human need to feel like I'm doing what's right and I'm participating in the community and I'm making a contribution to the community. And Jesus is modeling how I participate in this world to create that. And it's not by telling other people what to do, as that feels so good to me, so attractive, to simply tell them what to do and the world would be great. And I have to resist that. It feels very dangerous to let people go on doing what they're doing. They're not washing their hands right. And then I'm reminded of those people who were the enforcers of the law and how they forgot, as Jesus says, their own scriptures about how God's intention was that this shared ritual brings us all together. The scriptures are telling us to concentrate on God's laws as describing how love flows into me and through me and out into the world. And those laws support my feeling securely attached, my feeling of value, my feeling like I'm making a contribution, that whatever I'm doing is right, it's acceptable by other people, and that they see me and they hear me and they listen to me. That's a need, a basic human need that is, when met, gives me this sense of being securely attached. So we don't heal people the way Jesus Christ did, but when we sit with someone who is even difficult to love and look in their eyes and even hug them, that will set up a different response inside of their minds and hearts. They'll get a message through that touch that they are loved, they are cared for, they are valued. It will bring them back into community, bring them back into order, back into obeying the rules that we need to have obeyed. That can be so hard to do. And yet, as the work of our life, let us, I suggest, continue to watch what Jesus does in the Gospels here and pick up cues and clues as to how we too can support the development of secure attachment amongst all people. I pray this has supported your transformative life, whatever practice you have in your life. I want to thank Solomon Keel for his music, and I want to invite you to make a contribution to this work if you wish and are able through the PayPal link. And I invite you to continue to listen to the next episode. You be well.